So hi everyone one more time, and thank you to everyone who joined live, especially because there's so many familiar faces and so many dear faces, which gives me a really nice vibe and like, oh cool, I can just talk to friends instead of talking to, I don't know, unknown scary people. So thank you for that. We are recording this webinar as well, so as I said, if you want to drop off at any point, that's totally fine. Because of the recording, I will also put my video in spotlight. I won't be seeing you, so don't wave at me or anything else for this one. Instead, I will be keeping an eye on chat, and that's somewhere where you can drop in some questions and so on. Now, I already shared with the ones who are here, but also for the recording. I think this is a little bit unusual webinar in a way, because I will be talking about myself a lot, too much for my comfort zone. So I hope you'll endure with me with that, and that it will be interesting for you. The reason I'm doing it because I often get questions about it. Well, to cut the intro, let's get into it. The topic today is really like building a successful career in training. The idea is, on one side, to share my story just as an example, because I often get that question, but especially to give you a bit of a framework and tips and many ideas for your next steps if you're in a place where you would like to transition into a role of a trainer, consultant, coach, facilitator, and right now you are in a different role. So that might be a dream, an aspiration, but it also might be that you're already in that transition, but you're looking how to be more efficient at it, or how to feel better, or maybe for mistakes and traps to avoid. I will share those as well. Or the third scenario, maybe you are a trainer already. I know quite some of you here are, and you're still looking, okay, where am I going next in my career? What are maybe some blind spots I missed off a little bit? I will share in a minute which topics we will talk about. But before that, I would like to just start with how this topic came to be. It really came from all the questions and conversations. I don't think, which is maybe a bit sad, but I don't think that I ever got the question more often than the question, but how did you end up doing trainings? What led you there? How did you become a trainer? Or any version of that question. And the story is a bit long, so sometimes I overwhelm people with telling it all 101 and they regret asking. On other occasions, I give them a short summary that's more related to something they're doing. But yeah, it's definitely a question that comes very often, and I usually hesitate to talk about it on webinars or workshops, because I kind of think, hey, but that's just one specific story. That's just an example. It doesn't relate much to what you can do and position you are in and your talents and your background and so on. But then having so many times that question asked, I did decide to tackle it once and for all, and talk about the longer story, and then really also extrapolate what can you take out of it, and what can it maybe mean for you, and what are some of the learnings and a bit of a structure behind it. So I'm definitely talking about things that will be important for your potentially brand development, and also mindset development, and maybe a bit of strategy development, and definitely about identity of a trainer and skills and stuff down that line. I'm not talking about specifics of options you have as a trainer, or business development as a freelancer, or marketing strategy and so on, because that's not really areas that I support people with much, so I don't feel the best person to talk about it. However, the things we're talking about are also relevant for your business on the side of brand and how you communicate and so on, if you want to start your own business as a trainer, or for your career, again, in terms of personal brand, how are you positioning yourself in a way. If you will have some further questions on other bits, yeah, send them over. Maybe we do another webinar or podcast or something. Now, what we will talk about today, I will take first a bit longer chunk of time, maybe 10 minutes, maybe even longer, 15, to share quite detailed my story that led me to a training. The reason it's going to take so much time is because it took 17 years by today, or more or less, not totally sure of the exact year now. So it is a bit long story with many transitions. And I think one of the most common mistakes when people hear short version of my story is that they think there was a sudden switch or sudden transition, while instead it was an evolutionary growth where always one thing led to another. And it's only this range of many small steps that actually makes a story. And I think that's important to recognize, because I know everyone on this call has made many, many small steps already, but maybe now you're thinking, oh, I should do a big jump or something. Not necessarily. You want to think about how the whole story envelops. So after that, we're going to explore the meat of the webinar today, the main kind of thing I would say for you, which is talking about 3 different elements that I would say require some attention and that you want to be building as a trainer if you want to kind of move in those shoes or advance in those shoes. For each of the elements, I'll share some what they are and why they're important, and also some very specific tips, where to start from with them. They're all pretty broad things. And then we will end with very brief, just connecting them together and basically saying, hey, if this feels like too many things, maybe this one should come first. So I don't have answers for you. I have much more questions than answers, but I hope the framework will help you a little bit in thinking about your next steps. So with that in mind, let me share first very briefly how I usually present myself on webinars or workshops, if I do. Often people know me already, so I don't even do that. But if I do, I usually present myself as Mirna, sometimes as Creation, sometimes I just don't define that. And I'll usually say that I'm a trainer. Primarily, I work as a trainer in 2 areas: training for trainers, so training other trainers in foundational and advanced skills needed to create quality learning experience. And then also in area of positive psychology, so well-being, resilience, engagement, and topics like that. And training is really my main thing, which means I work with the small groups and in quite highly interactive way, where we, over a longer period of time, where we truly practice the new skills and how to put them in practice. I also occasionally work as a coach or a speaker, which are just ways of complementing kind of my focus area and my mission. But I would say that I identify most with being a trainer. And then I'll add contacts that are related to who I'm talking to, so Trainers Toolbox or Happiness Academy. And often I'll share that I also have a background of an engineer, and that one thing that defined in my training, or 2 things that defined in my training, is that I love to keep things practical as much as I can. So whatever theory or tool we are talking about, that I always want to ask the question, what's the goal of that? And how can you actually use that? And then also that it pulls me to look for, as much as I can, evidence-based practices and tools in my training. So usually at the beginning, I'll give some variation of that, maybe 3 sentences about, you notice what I did there probably in terms of what information I chose to present. I purposely wanted to give you that because later I will challenge you to be able to tell your story in a long and comprehensive way, like I'm going to do right now, but also to be able to tell it in 2 or 3 sentences, depending where are you telling it. And this can be really challenging. And I wanted you to also see maybe not the discrepancy, but like the differences in what I chose to extract into the short story from the big one. Now, on the big story, I don't have slides for that one. I just have them for your tools and tips and tricks. So on that story, I can maybe start from high school. And in high school, I think my main characteristics was I loved learning and I loved psychology. I loved many subjects. I loved biology. I loved psychology. I loved learning about brain. I loved learning about things that help me understand myself or other better, maybe about personality styles, communication styles, like, high school level, and then growing from there. And for a while, I was considering also studying psychology. And then I chose not to, because the perspective of psychology at that time was not very promising. So my options were definitely limited to studying in Zagreb, not very international world at the moment yet from Croatian perspective. And the faculty in Zagreb, I didn't really like the approach there because I felt it's very rigid in the way that you kind of plug in and you are really not an owner of your experience. You cannot be very proactive in the way how the process looks like. And also I didn't like where it could take you as a job at that point, which was usually fixing problems with employees in companies or fixing problems in schools with kids or maybe helping people choose career, but not very like in an environment that wasn't very inspiring, but it was very kind of rigid. And for me, that wasn't inspiring because I was really inspired in the side of improvement. How can we take what's good in people, in skills, in organizations, and how can we really nourish that to flourish? And that conversation didn't really exist at the time in Croatia at all. And that kind of pulled me back from the idea that loving the subject of psychology should in any way mean I should study psychology. So I went to study engineering instead. It might sound like a little bit strange choice, specifically electrical engineering and computing, a master's study, which in that faculty was the only option at the time. And with the idea, well, I don't want to go too deep into the drivers, but I loved physics. I loved things to be organized and measurable and structured, and that they make sense and that they work or they don't work. So you have to figure out what's the right way of making them work. I love to be goal-oriented. I love the environment of that university because it gave you a lot of freedom. Like you wouldn't need to go to any lectures. You would have to go to labs and active exercises. You could choose the way to study and engage with the subjects on your own as long as you would pass the exams. And I loved that, not necessarily flexibility, like, oh, you can do nothing. No, it was not the easy one. It was one of the toughest, I think, universities in Zagreb, or faculties in Zagreb next to medicine. So it was definitely not easy, but it gave you it gave you ownership. It didn't treat you like a high school student and put you in the process where you attend and obey, but it gave you a lot of ownership. And I always loved that. So in terms of environment, I was in a really good place. In terms of subject, some were more interesting, some were less interesting, not as engaging as psychology for me at the time, but still, I could find interesting things. So studying there also funnily allowed me to also dip my feet into, as some of you here know, into many of starting with into one of the NGOs or student organization or youth organization, however you want to call it, which was gathering the European students of technology, like hi besties, you know. That organization in the background or as the main goal, as the main mission, had the organization of different courses of 10 days duration on technical subjects for a group of 20 or more students from around Europe, basically enabling students to travel and experience new experiences and learn also more about technical subjects. And I quite loved the mission of the organization. I also loved travel, or I started traveling a bit before that, but still I was quite in love with traveling already, and that was a really good place for me. And I got quite engaged in it, in HR part. I also, like I was doing the board role in HR part in Croatia. I was running one of the courses because it was about diving and technology. What perfect topic for me. And just started playing with different projects like that. And within the organization, there was always also a training system. And the training system was basically quite related to, especially like in Zagreb view, maybe more, was related to when you do things and you learn to do them, like you have some experience in them, then you transfer that knowledge. Like you were guiding a project, you transfer it to new members. And then from the perspective of HR, and development of individuals, it was a role that was more like, hey, which skills do people need to run the project successfully, to motivate others in volunteer, in organization that's based on volunteers, to manage finances, okay, even though they're engineers excited about travel, to whatever else, to present the courses to other students and so on, not to go much deeper. But it was really about just thinking what the need is and what are interesting, useful skills we discovered, and then sharing those and retransferring that knowledge. And I still think today that BEST is very advanced in that training system, both in terms of community of trainers, both in terms of education of trainers, and just the way that the whole system is developed. So it was really amazing place to learn. So when I was close to an end of and about to graduate, I also chose that I definitely want to educate myself more to become better with trainings, and I love doing workshops and so on. Within BEST, I was in a little bit specific situation because in my first year when I was in a very active role in organization, I had the choice to apply for BEST trainer system, by applying myself or applying two other members who were really keen on it and who were younger and would stay with the organization longer. So first year I kind of skipped it, kind of sending them instead. One was great decision, the other one never did any training, but okay. Then at the last year of me being in BEST, again, I couldn't apply, or I didn't want to apply, but I also couldn't, I think it was a rule as well, because I would be staying as an organization until my graduation for around a year or just under a year. And the rule was after you finish training, you should stay for at least a year. I was a bit like, oh, that's pity, because I would want to go to train the trainer within BEST, and I loved the concept. But at the same time, I was like, okay, how am I going to do it instead? So instead, I went to professional trainer in Zagreb. It was a program that was first program of a kind in Zagreb. It costed more than my first car, much more. Luckily, I started working by that time, and it was quite a well-paid job in technology. And then it took a year with like 3 days per month throughout the year with different topics. It was 8 of us there. Everybody were way more experienced and older than me at the time. And it was incredible, inspiring event. So today, when I look back, I think it was actually good for me that the original path I was choosing, like psychology or later TTT within BEST, that they didn't like totally work out, but that instead I went different path. So I graduated from trainer. I think that was one of the most eye-opening experiences for me of how much actually complexity and exciting topics they are under that hood. And I graduated from it around the same time when I graduated from university. I already worked at Cisco, so a networking company, for around year, well, half time, because I was still studying, graduating, doing TTT, traveling, and so on. But I worked there for around a year. And when I graduated, I chose to stay in Cisco. I loved the company and stayed kind of in technology. But I was also very attracted to this arena of trainings. And I was like, okay, how can I still do more of that? Can I continue doing that as alumni in NGO? It wasn't so exciting anymore. Like I needed a bit different challenge, different environment. Some aspects of it also felt like, because it's NGO and volunteering area, like there's some very strong aspects, but there are also some that are lacking a bit. And I started to feel that and wanting to explore different areas as well, while still staying in NGO environment. So with Cisco, I got a chance to apply for a program that was happening in Amsterdam, and that was 1 year long. And it was a program where you basically are paid as an employee, but for a full year, you study full time. Technology, business skills, and soft skills, so 3 parallel tracks. And it was absolutely amazing place, because on one side it was in Amsterdam, well done. On the other side, the group of people was very inspiring, because they were recruiting 120, I think, people from 45 different countries all over Europe and Latin America. So very international, very high program to enter. I was the only one from Croatia. And because of that, the profile of people was so inspiring. It was really like dynamic, really proactive, with very diverse experiences, very international. For me, that was always the amazing thing I really wanted. And I think for me, the most important benefit of that program, unlike for most of my colleagues, was to really explore that area of how will they be teaching us things? You know, what are all, basically attending a training for a year in the role of participant is an amazing place to be a spy and to keep an eyes open and to notice what worked and what didn't, and to know in the group of us participants what the gossips are, and you know, what are the reactions to different trainings. Why is this one so exciting, and why does this one appear a bit fake, you know, and are these tools really useful, and which of the trainings did we actually, especially from soft and business skills, which ones did we actually implement and use and did something about them, and which one did we kind of brush off and didn't use. So I loved it. It was really exciting learning opportunity. Now, the story gets a bit shorter from here. That's the good news. So once that year ended, I was in a position that I wanted, like that year I wasn't delivering a little bit in BEST in Belgium, in Netherlands, but overall not so much, because I was really immersed in my environment. But when that year ended, many of my friends moved away from Amsterdam. I settled in a new role, in a new like job focused role, and was not so exposed to the well, to technical training still, but to other conversations, not as much. And of course, immediately I wanted to look for options. What else can I grow in and develop in? That was after around 2.5 years into my career, which was 10 years long in Cisco. And at that point, I was quite lucky, because the organization in which I was, we were supposed to move from this educational program right into the local offices in different countries and work directly on technical projects with local clients and local team, which for me would be much less exciting, loving the international environment. And, plus also in Croatia, projects technologically wise are not so interesting because they're not so big and so on. So that felt like very limiting options. And yet, because it was 2008 and the whole world crisis and a lot of crashes on the market, instead of sending us back to our office in our country, they offered us to choose some of the different technologies and positions in which we will be working, because they believed if they send us now to countries with weaker economy, we will not last there. And they didn't want to lose us after investing so much in our training. So I chose Amsterdam, and I chose data center, which was the newest technology at the Cisco at the time. And I got exactly what I chose. And I stayed with that team, and I stayed in Amsterdam for the next 2 years, and then in Cisco for another 6. And in these 2 years, I was in a role which was very technologically demanding, yet we were all very junior as well. Yet the technology was just forming. It was like super new. Nobody knew anything about it. And we were first ones to receive training about it, literally like every 2 days, the updates and stuff like that. And then we're needing to translate or transform that training further globally in Cisco to clients, to customers. At the beginning, it was very limited selection of clients because they were very protective of doing these first projects well and so on. So we were in a position where we would have to explain technology to people who were way technologically more advanced than us, or to explain business value of technology to people who are way ahead in business mindset than us. And that drove us to stick very close together as a team. And we were a couple of teams, how you look at the size, you could say it was 6 of us who were really close in one sub-team, but then also like maybe 20, depends how you look. What I loved about that was also many opportunities to keep on learning, and also to facilitate learning a little bit and talk to others and see who is doing well and why, and just, nerd around learning in that. I stayed in that team for basically until end of my career in Cisco, so for next 8 years, but the team changed drastically, like every year, very drastically. And with time, it also grew. When I left, it was a team of more than 300 or 400 people globally. And with that, it kept opening in different years, different opportunities to engage with facilitation, with learning, with people development, and so on. Often it meant to train juniors, being it in technology, often in soft skills as well. Often it meant a lot of mentorship, sometimes coaching as well, not officially. We had a lot of freedom in our role to kind of push for things as side projects that we liked while working on the techie stuff. And I really used that a lot and kind of shifted through projects. At the same time, when I moved back to Croatia, which was in 2011, for me, opened freedom of location. With job in Cisco, I was the only one from my team in Croatia, which meant I don't have to work from the office. And I just used that to travel a lot and to also combine it with different training projects. So at that time, I also started looking for more opportunities. Where can I be delivering more trainings, more projects, not just Invest, which started to feel a bit like, one context, and I wanted something new and different. And then I applied as a trainer for one a bit specific event. And someone who's there on this call had their fingers in getting me there. No, still important impact on my life. So as I applied for trainer on one of the cross NGO project, there was a 10 days long training project for youth leadership. And it was organized by 14 different trainers from different NGOs. And it was type of a project that you prepare for 6 weeks and then you 6 months virtually, like virtual collaboration, very early in 2011. And then from there, you deliver it after these 6 months, maybe for 10 days or so. And I loved it. And I kept doing these projects. And I think over the 6 years, I did maybe at least 9 I can think of now. So maybe 9 or 10. So basically every half a year in a start of something new. And there were leadership projects, they were train the trainers, they were train advanced trainers, many different things, topic-wise, really interesting, really exciting to learn, but also not very business or corporate oriented, but very NGO environment and youth environment. So a little bit different than my work context. And it was like wearing 2 different hats all the time in these different contexts. So with that, I kind of always knew I always knew I love training and I would want to move in the role of training eventually. But I also kept postponing it for a very long time because I had a bit of identity crisis in a sense. Engineering me was really keen on having things goal-oriented, measured, knowing your impact immediately as you do the project, seeing how it works and if it works. And as we know, with training, that takes often a bit longer time, and often it's a bit more vague. You see some impact, but it's not so measurable, maybe except in presentation skills. These are nice to, boost your sense of impact. But in everything else, you see shift in people, you see people learning new things, but you don't take them from beginning to an end. You take them one step further in their very long journey of growth in life and development in life. And that was bugging me for a while. It was bugging me that books and tools and things we work with don't feel enough evidence-based and science-based, and that too often they feel like a bit bullshitty and like a good marketing, depending on the models. And also the agenda of organizations often is a little bit not enough, I would say, sharp and goal-oriented. And that was really an obstacle for me. And that was one of the reasons for a long time I was kind of postponing that path. The other reason was I loved the place where I was. I loved my team, most of my teams at Cisco. I also loved the environment and the culture, although it's very like American, international American culture organization, but it was really nice in terms of supportiveness, flat hierarchy, asking any questions, being involved in very international environments, being involved in different types of projects, allowing a lot of freedom of location and kind of goal-oriented work more than compliance-oriented. So a lot of things, and it felt like really nice area to see how things work in practice and why don't they and when do they, and how do some things succeed spontaneously in terms of organizational development, and how are some facilitated and so on. So in the end, at one point, I decided that I'm getting too old. I mean, in terms of energy, I was like, okay, I feel a bit tired. I feel like I'm too much in action mode 24/7. Something needs to, I need to cut something off. And at that time, I would be running the quite big training projects. I would be working in Cisco. I was quite like, I love sports and nature. So I keep like moving a lot and spend a lot of time that way. And I loved traveling, and I was traveling very intensively, like 80% of the time for several years. And I was like, something needs to go. And then looking into these aspects, I was like, job needs to go. Or Cisco needs to go in this case. But there was more to it. It was also that I knew that where I liked place where I was, but where it was taking me further would not have been as exciting. Not to like over-explain that, but all the career paths that were towards or corporate management or technical, overly nitty-gritty details were not appealing. And then also technology that was so exciting because it was so new for a long time now became so mature that now it was like boring small technical updates and not big paradigm shifts that technology is creating. And all of that became less and less exciting. So with that, I was like, okay, I'm moving away. And at the same time, I was like, okay, but what's next then? What am I stepping into? What will I choose as sort of, within training? I don't want to go and be like, hey, I do training on communication, negotiation, presentation, and every skill you can imagine. Which one would you like? I really wanted to at least a little bit choose, okay, what is my area? What do I stand for? And by the way, I love communication and presentation, but still, what am I kind of, aiming at? What will I start building up? And finally, at that time, for a long while already, I was looking into positive psychology. And in the meantime, like I started by just looking into the tools of positive psychology. Somewhere around 2009, I discovered it on one travel, obviously. And I started bringing in more and more tools, and I really liked many things about it. It did sound sometimes a bit too perky and positive, but I love the part that it's really taking the research into account, and that it's trying to be a bit more, smart and engineered in methods in comparison with some other directions in training. And that really spoke to me. And I was taking more and more tools and working more and more with those topics. And then I decided, actually, yeah, that will be the topic that I really want to kind of focus on. And I was dreaming of focusing on TTTs as well, but maybe later. So starting with positive psychology and then train the trainers later on. Now, when I decided that, I also realized that I will not feel okay if I leave my job now and I'm like, now I'm doing positive psychology. And I had the need to formalize that with a diploma. I don't think that's necessary, but for me, I felt like I wanted it and I needed it. At the same time, I also felt like from positive psychology, I drained all the resources I could find. I literally read like all the books I could find. Now there are many more, but still at the time. And all the online courses and all the materials. And I did feel a bit at the dead end, like I want to go deeper, but how? So that led me to also that and a broken leg in a motorbike accident, young age, led me to have some extra time as well to think about life, and no sports and no travel. That led me to start the master's in positive psychology. And I started that on full time because I was like, I don't have the patience. And I graduated a bit less than 2 years later. It's a bit shorter than 2 years. And it was a study that is applied. So master's in applied positive psychology, which basically says that you can come with any background, organizational, manager, therapist, teacher. I came more as a trainer. I was probably the only engineer there. And take the tools and learn the tools that then you will be able to apply and adapt within your field. I loved it. I think I'm kind of a first generation that graduated in Europe. I wasn't the first generation who started that study, but because people mainly were doing it part-time, I was among the first generations who graduated. It was very small groups, amazing professors, a lot of deep conversations. And the stamp of approval. And I can tell you that even though I don't think masters or that kind of stamp of approval is needed for training career, I can say it was beneficial to have it, both for my confidence in the way I present myself, especially with difficulty of measuring what is your background as a trainer, but also in terms of like how people see me sometimes. So yeah, that's also maybe something to consider. When I graduated, I took a year off. I just went traveling. I was like, for 2 years, it was full-time job and full-time study. Now I'm out. And I did a couple of small training projects that came up spontaneously, but they were very small. And then after that year off, I started 5.5 years ago. I started officially building up both Happiness Academy and Trainers Toolbox. Both brands already existed because I started them before I left Cisco, but they were very unbuilt. Like Happiness Academy had the logo, the visual identity, and had one course of 12 weeks that took me almost a year to design, like actively. And then Trainers Toolbox was just a blog that had a vision of sharing new areas and tools with trainers, with the assumption that many trainers, which I recognized initially for myself as well, while I was still kind of in best area of training, that many trainers have one school they go through in a way, one methodology, one background, one organization, and that they stay very long with that one. And that it's very enriching to discover different perspectives and ways of work and methods. I'll give you an example. I did coaching certification, all of these a long time ago, maybe around 2011, 2012, like coaching, NLP, different therapeutic methods and tools. And none of them is today my primarily field, but I feel like they all enriched a lot my methods. And I love that they are, and I feel like I have a good toolbox, and I feel confident because of that as well as a trainer, and that they impacted my skill. And I think it's really important for trainers not to stick with one school, even though you can have primary one, but to be more open and explore. And that was the vision of Trainers Toolbox blog, not to have everything there, every tool, not at all, but to offer something new for everyone, you know, writing about topics like embodiment in training or whatever, points of view as a tool, which now is more well-known than it was less well-known. I don't know, some of the tools from positive psychology or positive psychology as a field, just kind of, you know, opening that up a little bit. So then when I moved fully into it, I started really building them both as a bit of a business. And here the story becomes much shorter. And that is, I think everything from then went quite organically. The beginning was what was really important, choosing what were the topics I'll be working with. What is the brand? Is it me going to be the brand, or am I building separate brands? Is it one niche or separate things? And then also, you know, which clients do I want to work with? How will I talk about what I do? How will I prove that I'm good at it, even though I was engineer until yesterday? Like, and many things like that. So how will I start building my network in that? How will I reach new clients? And all these little worries. Now, these are some of the things that I'll be talking about today, more from perspective of shaping that new beginning and transition, and what is the story there, more like from practical side of where we go. If you ask me where I'm today, I would say I'm in a place which I really love. And I'm really satisfied with how things are developing. Yet at the same time, I feel it's a little bit too messy and that it grew very organically in many directions. And my dream, I would say, for the next few years is to, in some aspects, to simplify it a bit, to clear it out, to have less noise and a little bit more focused impact. But that might be story of my life as well. So no, we'll see. But that's the place where it's today. So if you're still there and not snoozing and, you know, drinking your fifth coffee, I hope that wasn't way too long and that you got some ideas from some of the steps. But I want to come back now to this first slide where I told you who I am in 3 sentences as I would present it on a webinar. It's so different, right? It's so hard to connect from one to the other. So today, what I would want to still explore with you, also in terms of tips, and best practices and things that you can be building up as a trainer, it's 3 areas. First one is skills, and that's the one I'll probably talk most abstractly about because it's kind of the broadest. And then the other 2 are more targeted and a little bit easier to explore. I would want to invite you for this part to wake up and to think really from perspective, how is this working for you right now? Because in each of these, I'll talk about why this matters, what goes under this area, under different skills, how can you work on them, and then 2 very specific tips where to start if all of it will feel a little bit too much. And I do want to invite you, as you've probably been sitting for a while, to also remember to stretch a bit and keep your body alive, not just your ears and brain and eyes. So with skills, I chose to start with it, even though it's the messiest area I'll talk about, because I genuinely believe that skills in the end are the most important thing for a trainer. And of course, you need to be good with business and marketing, good enough with business and marketing and whatnot, but none of it will be good if your skills are not good. And also, like none of it will matter if then in the training room you're not good at what you do. So I do want to underline that if you go and do training, coaching, consultancy, do not do that speedy track. Let me jump into the certification and tomorrow I'm a coach and I start coaching and I just, you know, find some clients and jump into it and I have no idea what I'm doing yet. Of course, skills come with experience, but respect the process. Don't do it a 10 years process like me. It is not necessary, but give it some space, give it some time, because what that will give you, first, you will be really satisfied and in flow with things you do. You will feel well. You will feel well about your identity. You will feel well about the way you're doing things. And that is really, really important. You would be surprised. And then also, it will also give you a sense of impact. If you do a couple of workshops, or like I suffer a little bit with webinars from this, like not feeling sense of impact, but like in the workshops, the change you see in people and the feedback you get, when you get a lot of it, you feel really, really positive about your impact into the world and about what you're doing. And if it happens that for something like a webinar or or a workshop that was maybe an environment where the topic actually people weren't interested in or whatnot, if you don't have that energy and you will not feel sense of impact, and that is not sustainable, then that's a job. Then that's a worse job than any other job you've been in, right? Because there is no that drive forward and that excitement and energy. And then the third thing for which skills are priceless is marketing and references. You can be as good as you want in really marketing your skills, building your website, promoting stuff. But in the end, if then you don't do a really good job, that will not be sustainable. And I think for most of trainers that I know, myself included, most of our work does come through word of mouth and recommendations. And more importantly, the best of our work comes that way because it brings aligned client, it brings cool people, it brings alignment in values with the clients with whom we're working. So, and how is the way to do that? Well, with a little bit of marketing, but also with just working on those skills. Now, that includes on one side skills about the topic, and on the other side skills about how to do training well. I know this is a bit abstract. I'll try to give you a bit more specific tools as well. The question really then becomes, what does it mean to build those skills? What does it mean to move ahead? I would say this can really start with building individual personal development plan. And I don't mean here official career development booklet or whatnot. I really mean just know what you need to develop. I think too many of us, because we are learning junkies and we just want to learn more, stay too often with jumping into learning more and more and new and more of things we like and more of things we're interested in, and not necessarily more of things that are most important for us in terms of our skills right now. So I would want to invite you, wherever you are with this, to step back for a minute and be a bit more intentional and reflect, what are my next steps that I want to develop? What are the most impactful skills, if I would strengthen them, that they would serve me? Now, with that in mind, that also means that our personal development plan should be based on our goals. Where do I want to get as a trainer? What kind of trainer do I want to be? And also that it should be aware of our strengths and weaknesses. So talking about both, what am I good at, how am I using it, but also what are my pitfalls and how can I work on those? And finally, that we need to build that continuous feedback. I think this is toughest for trainers who are in their role for a long time already. They're comfortable there and they love it and they're doing it well. And then it's natural to be like, yeah, sure, everything is smooth. What's the need to keep on questioning? But that's one thing that really makes a lot of sense. I think all of the trainers are very good with keep on developing their skills because we love learning, obviously, and reading and experimenting. But we are not all very good with being intentional, goal-oriented, and smart about which skills will give us most impact. So that's my first invitation today. In terms of what makes our skills, I don't want to go too deep into it because it is hugely broad and it is hugely individual who needs what. I will say that on one of the early TTTs, we did a very long list of what are all the different competencies the trainer needs to have, and list past, I think, 300. So usually I don't talk about that list much. I do share it with TTT attendees, but I don't talk about it much because I think it's overwhelming. But the point is exactly, if you look for every skill that you could be developing, good luck, not in a lifetime, right? So because of that, it's so important to go into targeted approach and what is most important right now, while still keeping an eye open for what is sabotaging me and what's next. When I say it that way, I would say in a very generalized way, what are the top 3 groups of skills that each trainer should pay attention to or start with or make sure that they're prioritized? One is, of course, training, design, and delivery, or workshop, or coaching process if it's about coaching, right? But in a way, also like examples like facilitation, understanding how learning works, understanding more about brain and how brain works, learning science, and just the tools, how to design training well and different exercises and so on. So the foundations of what the trainer usually teaches us. And this can be huge and we never stop learning this, but it is something that is necessary and often overlooked because we build our first workshops usually based on our preference and our previous experiences. And we think that's how you do things, and we don't think what are the other options. Now, the second one is your topics of expertise. That is something that I think here you can hear different thoughts in terms of facilitation and training. How deep of an expert does a trainer truly need to be? And when can they harvest more from more experienced participants and blah, blah. I don't want to go in that discussion. But I would say that that's really important to understand. What is your topic of expertise? And do you really know about it more than one book you read? And do you really know about it more than an average person next to you? And how can you keep on deepening that topic? And then third one, I think that's one where maybe we don't think about it so much, is that actually what we bring into the training room is our personality and habits and skills and ways of doing things that we have as a person in everyday life. So really, skills as a trainer start from skills as a person. In my everyday communication, am I doing the things that I want to be doing in training? Am I practicing different skills of, I don't know, communication, presentation, explaining things in different ways, encouraging others to speak, having an attitude that others have ownership? So different skills in everyday life that feed into and connect with skills in training. So that's something also where in each of these three, we want to find some way of getting feedback and discovering what are our blind spots. Within TTT on Trainers Toolbox, within Train the Trainer on Trainers Toolbox, we do that also with Trainers Compass. I will not go into that tool now because that would be very long and a webinar in its own, but I will share this slide and also the link to one article on Trainers Toolbox written by Herman, that will give you just some self-reflection framework that you can start from if you don't have other ideas where to start. Just taking these, 8 areas and reflecting on each. Where am I with this? Which of these should I be developing? Now, that's one of the tools you could be using. Now, how to work on your skills? Let's get practical. First, maybe one of the most important things, it's exposure. Even though you might want to choose the dominant school you sign up for, the dominant approach, the dominant course, the dominant methodology, that's great. That's your fallback to. Doing trainings in just one context, environment, country, company, or organization, or doing it mostly just in that one area, will inevitably put you in a path that's repetitive, habitual, and where you keeping always the same mindset and having some blind spot. So I would strongly encourage you, apart from having maybe your main track in a way, to see how much can you expose yourself to different experiences, styles, training styles, things to attend, things to deliver, really playing with diversity of experiences and tools because that will show you the blind spots. So of course, we need to also develop vertically in depth of the methodology we are doing, but it's equally important to discover that. And communities can be a great way of doing this. 2 communities I really love for this are Session Lab community, I don't know if you know it, and also L&D Shakers community. I can send maybe there was one more, but it's not really that active anymore. So I would go with these 2. I will send also in the follow-up email the links to these and just kind of jumping into new experiences. The second way of working on our skills, of course, apart from exposing ourselves to all the different things, it's also so important to choose our focus. To choose our focus means to also know what is our dominant methodology and what are our main topics. And I purposefully underline this here because people often think that what they choose to focus on is the topics, but it is also approach. How do you work? What is your, values and way of doing things and so on. And for this, I think one of the biggest, from my perspective, for myself sometimes as well, but also for most of trainers around me, one of the worst things we keep on doing is sometimes not narrowing down enough. And I think that's always something you want to keep on. What is really my focus? Really defining it very sharply in my topics. What is my niche in my approach? What is my truly dominant focus? Of course, for this, you need some experience. And next to the focus, you want to keep doing other little things to discover the blind spots, but also having that dominant one. And then the third one is the continuous improvement. And that's 3 roads that we can be nourishing. One is getting feedback. I'll talk about this feedback more later, because I think there is also a really big trap in terms of where we ask for feedback and how we ask for feedback. And then also it's new experiences, and then also it's new knowledge. So just learning experiences, meaning jumping in all the different contexts that we can. And new knowledge means learning new tools, methodologies, info, and so on. Now, with that, I want to quickly underline what could be some of the next steps. If this was too abstract, too broad, too many options, what are the specific things I would recommend to do next as a trainer to nourish your skills? One is self-reflect and create that kind of personal development plan. Doing exercises like plus minus question mark, basically, what am I good at? What should I improve? And what other options do I want to explore? Doing things like Johari, one of the tools for reflection. If you don't know it, Google will tell you about it. But then also finding your top priorities, but then also keep on checking for blind spots, and basically making the specific next steps according to your impact, according to where you want to get next, and not according to which topic is shiny object pulling you right now. The second thing is, one of the things that you can definitely look into if you're looking for steps in your development that are about rounding up and advancing your skills in delivery and design of training, then Train the Trainer, including the one in Trainers Toolbox, but potentially also other Train the Trainer programs, is a really good way to go for it, because that's the place to get the broader framework, many tools, but then also feedback. But again, if that's the area you want to develop. The second thing is gathering a lot of relevant feedback, especially feedback to your workshops, especially feedback from diverse people, from participants, from trainers, from clients, from people who are not all in the same role. And also asking the right set of questions there. I think with feedback, maybe the most important thing is to think which feedback is actually relevant. Because if we just give generic question to everyone, what's your feedback? Like, sometimes that's good actually, but in feedback, we really also want to think strategic. How will I discover my blind spots? What do I need to know? Do I need the feedback on content of my workshops? Do I need the feedback on my skills? Do I need the feedback on their experience? Like what? So in feedback, we always, in terms of questions and also who we are asking, we always want to question, is that relevant and is it relevant enough? And then not go into, did you like this? But then focus on learning, on impact, and so on in the feedback we get, and also in our skills. Now, that was the skills, the biggest area. I'll still talk about your story, not my story anymore, your story, in a similar way, like about skills, but a bit shorter and more specific because it's more tangible. And then I'll talk about one more topic. Each of them will take around 10 minutes. So sorry for extending it so much. I did warn you, this will probably go long. If you have to go, I totally understand. I do think this will be maybe the most practical part. So I would invite you, if you go, to check it out. Or if you're watching a recording, to make a little break maybe before continuing. So with the story, the question is, again, why story matters. Story is really how you explain who you are and what's your journey as a trainer. And that, in a way, on one side, becomes your brand, your personal brand, and it has an impact on the brand of your training. On the other side, it also becomes your credibility. It becomes, how will you explain that you actually in some way are good at what you do and that you're a good fit for the client without saying, hey, I'm good with being a trainer. So something about your story needs to be there that will be a confirmation for them that they can trust you. And the third thing I didn't outline here is also alignment. Your story will define who resonates with you as a client and who you will work with. And you want to work with cool people. So because of that, you need to figure out how to tell a good story. And important thing about your story is that often we get entangled how it's about us and our previous experiences, like CV. My story is I've been doing this for this long time and I've been doing that for this long time. And these are my projects and experiences. But actually, our story is also about our values, about our way of work, about sharing some examples of our work, about sharing the approaches we like to take, the beliefs that we have, and so on. So it has this huge importance also in terms of what you bring in as your authentic self, and not just what did you do before. When we think about story like that, what is it that makes your story? It's, first of all, how you present yourself. And this is the part that very often what happens, and what was very difficult for me as well, is to think what information actually needs to go there, and not what is everything that's important about me for this situation, but really getting that concise 2-3 sentences. What am I about as a trainer? How am I working as a trainer? And that's, so our story, we will most often talk about or write about in these 3 contexts. First, when we are presenting ourselves on conferences or in bio. And here, I mean even more in written. You speak somewhere, you show up somewhere as a trainer, you advertise your own workshop, and you write that about me, right? And that is where your story goes. And also on LinkedIn and whatnot. So on LinkedIn, within your profile, but also within your posts. LinkedIn or other social networks. I think LinkedIn right now, business-wise and training-wise, is probably the most relevant one. Might be Instagram, depending on your topics. But I would say LinkedIn is kind of the most relevant one. That's why I'm mentioning it a little bit more. Let me just check. I see a question. Oh, yeah. Somebody saying bye. No worries. Drop off. Check it later if you want. Okay, so LinkedIn is the second place. And then we also have the place of just how we show up on real life and how we talk to colleagues and friends and family and how they see us. I'll give you an example. If I am presenting my story in my written thing as being practical, and my family and friends and colleagues never see me as a practical person and they see me as very impractical, that's not great, because then I'm not showing in my actions my story, I'm just telling it in my words. And similar for other things. If I'm doing presentation skills, that's a tough one from that perspective. Then when I'm doing presentation or communicating with someone, I should, follow some of the same principles that I'm talking about in the training. So kind of like that walking the talk bit, right? It can also mean, like for me, well-being, resilience is a topic. If I'm talking about these topics, I cannot be miserable all the time. I can occasionally, no, as we're talking about that within that topic as well, but not like, super misery. So our story is basically everything we tell and show about ourselves that gives people impression of who am I, and am I a trainer? And as a trainer, who am I? And I think the important thing, I mentioned it already, I cannot underline enough. In that story, it's not just about me. It's also about my work, my messages I share, opinions I present, beliefs I talk about. When I think about it like that, the question is, of course, so how do I work it out? And in the next step, we'll also talk about where do I share it. But for now, how do I work it out? I think the first step in working on our story is to write it down. We've all done this because we needed to tell to someone who we are, write a motivation letter, present ourselves on LinkedIn, present ourselves on a workshop. But did we really give it enough of reflective, quiet space to think, not about how do I want to present myself for this event, but what is truly my story? And then from there, first thing you need to do is accept the identity crisis that comes with it. None of the stories is ever good enough. None of the stories is ever comfortable enough. All of them feels like, or too detailed, or too vague, or too abstract, or too braggy, or too humble, so I don't sound like I'm good at something or whatnot. So there will be iterations and iterations of writing this story, and emotionally, this is not an easy thing to do, nor mentally. Then what we want to do is really play with that story and really play with size of it. From long versions, like that's maybe the best first step, to write very long version, like the mine today, But then also playing with narrowing it in different formats. 6 sentences for a bit longer part on the website, 3 sentences for this kind of event, and then 3 sentences for this very different event, and exploring that. I cannot recommend you enough to play with this. Probably you haven't enough, because it's not comfortable, but I cannot overestimate how important it is to actually fine-tune that message, not just for others, for you. Who are you? And then this is also really nice to think, how do you present yourself when somebody asks you what you do? You know, you are walking your dog, you meet other person who is walking their dog, and they ask you, what do you do? What do you say? Took me probably a year of saying, you know, I wasn't an engineer, but now I'm a trainer. That's so abstract, right? No, not in these words, but kind of. So how do you tell it? How do you feel about telling it? What information do you focus on? And you can play with this, from networking events to speed dating to person you meet in the elevator. How do you talk about it? How do you talk about it now, spontaneously, when you don't think about how should you be talking about it? And then one more tough part can be to let go of irrelevant bits of the story. I'm sure you're familiar with this CV advice, which is like, if you worked for 5 years in this serious position and 5 years in this other serious position, and before that for 3 months on part-time in this silly random thing you did just for the money during your university, don't put the third one in your CV. Not everything about you has to be there. And the same thing goes for trainings. Not every experience, not every event, not everything needs to find its way. But it's really also about, you know, what should I let go? What should I detach from? I can say there are even occasionally events where I don't mention I was an engineer. No, just as an example. Huge part of my identity, 10 years of my history. But sometimes it's not relevant, or it can even be harmful in some environments. Okay, then the second of 3 steps of how to work on your story. Remember the structure, 3 steps how to work, and then 2 immediate points where to start. So the second one is to keep asking for feedback. Again, relevant feedback from relevant people. I think trainers are often very open to feedback, and they keep on asking. And they keep on asking their friends and their like-minded colleagues and other trainers, which we, you know, are similar with. But you want to really think, who needs to give me feedback to this story? People who you want to tell it to. Usually that's clients or people as similar to your clients as they can be. Sometimes other trainers. And then also, you know, people who are with different background than you, different environment, who maybe don't know you so well, that can really outline for you, how does this story look like from a very different angle. So be very mindful on the feedback, not on skills, but on story, that you ask people who are actually similar to people who you will be telling your story to. And the third thing we need to figure out within the story of me is how we feel about that story, especially if we are doing a transition. And more or less everyone does, because there are not that many universities for trainers or coaches. There are some, but not that many. But almost everyone has some sort of transition. And that transition does give us a moment when we might feel not good enough, not clear enough in what we do or what our story is, not congruent enough, not confident enough, or any of those. And this is something that we need to work with on our skills to become closer to what we want to be, but also on our story. How can I frame this story that it feels authentic, that it resonates, but it's also cool and credible? And how can I keep on telling it so my feelings about it become excitement of telling my story, and not like, you know, what will they think type of a thing. So practicing that in different environments, regardless of discomfort. Now, very quick, 2 first steps to fine-tune your story, regardless of what have you done with it so far, and you have a great story already, or you have no idea, or you have a great one, but it's too complicated right now. It's really to play with formats. What is your story in a 1 page? And what is your story in 2 sentences? And then everything in between. And then also to play with audiences. How is my story different when I put it on this conference website, when I share it with this client, and whatever third might be. When you do that, it's great to leave it for a week and then read it again, and then fine-tune, like fresh eyes, and then also ask for feedback on that story, again, from relevant people. The second step is really, again, practicing that part of getting comfortable telling that story. I know I also said these are the big house, but they're also the first 2 immediate steps. So I will invite you, if you are, if you have a story or don't have a story, either case, to create some time, ideally within a week or two, to just sit down, put that story on the paper spontaneously, wherever it is. Maybe you know it already, you've done it many times, but don't read it, write it again and see how it makes you feel. What do you like about it? What is more shady? What are you missing? And which parts of it feel like truly you and you are proud of them? It should be both. And which parts feel like not confident enough to share, or maybe they don't feel so cool because you're not managed, you don't want to brag, so you underplay them or whatnot. So that's the 2 tasks to play with if you want to explore your story. The third aspect is your network. So when we talk about doing that transition and the steps into your role as a being trainer in your career, or moving forward as a trainer in your career in any next level or place, it's these 3 things you need to work on and look into: skills, your story, how you talk about and think about yourself, and your network. And then, of course, comes business skills as well. But these 3 are the ones, without them, it will be very, very hard to have a congruent, holistic approach. And there are things that if you never did, just do a draft of what you have right now first, and then see where it needs to go next. Don't be perfectionist. And if you've done it already and you have it all built up, then it might be the time to be perfectionist, to look into it, look for blind spot, ask for relevant feedback from new people, and yet just play with how you're working with that. So in terms of your network, first one, why network matters? Matters is really about who are you telling that story to. If you crafted them, let's take me as an example. I crafted, imagine this theoretically, here, hypothetically, I crafted the best story about me as a trainer in the world. And then I go and tell it to my previous manager in engineering. What does he care? What's the value of me telling him that? So he will just be like, oh, so you're not the good engineer anymore, are you? So, right? So the question is really, who are you telling it to? Don't design, a story and then it's amazing and then it's just shared with wrong people. And ideally, we should be sharing our story once we have it designed with 2 groups of people, and 2 groups of people only. One are our clients or potential clients, people we would actually want to work with, people who are ideal to fit into our projects or collaboration. And the second one, well, that could also go for potential partners as well, but let's say clients more. And the second one is your cheerleaders, people who promote your work, people who cheer for you, people who give you positive energy. And it can be either of these. It doesn't have to be that they promote you everywhere. It can also be that they give you positive energy, that they give you positive feedback, that they're like, oh, finally you did that move to a trainer. Oh no, you have some experience, even you don't feel like that right now. So anyone who is feeding into our energy, who is helping us grow our network, who is helping us open new opportunities, who is recommending us maybe, or give us testimonial, more formal way of being a cheerleader, who gives us good feedback that nourishes our feeling of impact. So anyone who is giving that. Anyone else, you should not even be telling your story to. And that's kind of hard because we can't even filter that. And it's like, but that is something where we really want to think and focus. You will not get new clients, you will not develop your business or your career as a trainer if you tell your story to 2,000 people and it's the most amazing story, but none of them fits the persona of who your client should be, right? So it's not, you're not going to help your business if you speak on a conference for people with background and topic of conference that has nothing to do with what you do, and then you present your story really, really well. Not the point, right? So we really want to think, who are these people who make part of our network? Where do you find these cheerleaders and potential clients or collaborators? One is simply people we talk to, the way we engage with the world, people you meet on the travel. Imagine anyone who you would have a coffee with, friends, colleagues, anyone who crosses your path. This, of course, includes also the previous clients as well and anyone else. The second one is also anyone in your virtual world, people on your newsletter, people on your LinkedIn. I would say these are maybe two stronger channels, but then also people in any other, meetups, communities, audience of any kind that is engaging with your content and with you, because they hear what your story is. And then it can also be someone when you join a conference or an event who is a totally new audience for you, but still, in a way, that's a new place that grows your network. So you can think of people who are in your circle already, then people who are in your virtual circles, and then people in places where you show up as someone who is not normally there and where you just start building the connections. Now, with network, to keep on developing it, there are three things we can work with. One I would definitely recommend starting with and not overthinking it. Like sit down, take an hour, get this done. Looking into who is in your current network right now. Who is there? How can you help them? That question should always come before asking how can they help me, but really like, how can I help them? Why do I want to help them? If you don't want to help them, they're not good connection for you anyway. And how can I connect with them better? But then also potentially, how can they support me? How can we support each other mutually? And that's just literally sitting and thinking, who are people who are in my network that's relevant for my business? That might mean they're not my friends, or it might mean they are my friends and close contacts, but it's still filter, which not everybody will pass. The second one is, how can you keep developing your network? Really good way is to define your ideal client and people you would want to connect with more. Do sort of an avatar or a persona, and then plan where and how can you connect with them. And this is basically just about choosing the place where I go and where I spend my time and where I engage with new people and where I meet new people, choosing them a bit more intentionally in relation to what I do and who I do it with. And here I'm really not talking like the shark approach, and like, go target them, find them, catch them there, but really about exposing ourselves to what is good match for us as well. And then the third one is recognizing also how our cheerleaders are. I think this is something we don't always appreciate enough. We appreciate when somebody gives us immediate value, like a recommendation or not, but maybe not always enough. And appreciating those cheerleaders more and recognizing how important they are for us, both internally in our thoughts and both telling them that, can be a huge thing. So I really would encourage you to do that, because it's also a fair thing to do if they've done something cool for you. And this is also about looking for new communities that are supportive type of communities, which will in some way cheerlead and give you that energy. Okay, and the last little bit, 2 immediate, very quick steps that you can start doing by building your network. First one is just keeping more awareness of your network. I know we all kind of have an idea who's there, but my question is also, who are you talking to about business stuff and your offer and things you do, who does not care at all and shouldn't even be part of that conversation? And then also, who are you not talking to, and where can you find those people who should be more part of that conversation? I can give you an example here. For me, it was a big challenge when I left Cisco, that huge part of my network were or hardcore IT people in Cisco, not as interested in the topics I would be doing now, or a lot of NGO people, not as interested in joining paid professional courses because they're used to more like Erasmus Plus funded things and they have a student budget or whatnot. So my network was really big. There were quite some cheerleaders in it, but it did not contain many potential clients, right? And that's something you want to differentiate. I still loved that network and I still love it. And I want to keep on keeping it as network of friends and people I care about. But as business network, it's not so useful necessarily. And then the second thing is investing conscious time in developing it further. So asking conscious questions, how satisfied am I with my network? Do I have enough of people here if I launch a new project now that the project will fill up? Are they the right people? Are they enough of people? What is their interest in the topic and so on? Now, you can imagine each of these three, the story, the skills and the network, we could explore in 1 hour webinar or 3-hour workshop in itself, design a bit of a strategy that, really prepare more comprehensive action steps and whatnot. And they're all very big topics. But my goal today was to remind you a bit of what are all the things there and to try to tease you into what are your blind spots. Which of these did you neglect? Are you talking to people who are not so important? Do you have a mismatch between story and the network? Do you have a mismatch between skills and the story? Is the problem with your story the language in which you explain it or the feeling which you explain it with? Do you appreciate your cheerleaders enough? So I would hope most of you knew many of these things already, but I would also hope this structure and tips and way of thinking of it gave you some new ideas of blind spots you can look into to make your plan more holistic, to make it more kind of rounded up. Now, I did throw in a lot of things at you. So I will say start with the ones that resonated a little bit more, but also I would say that maybe putting that story down should be the first step, because that will show you where you are and what do you need. Do you need skills? Do you need confidence? Do you need better network to tell it to? How do you need to work on that story? By experience or by learning how to tell it better? So I would say start with putting that story down. And after that, do an assessment of your skills and your network as well. And then see from there what comes up as the topics to talk. I would recommend taking maybe an hour per each of the 3 pillars, sometimes in the next week or 2, and going through reflection, what do I want to be working on within this area? Am I strategic enough? Am I intentional enough? What do I want to be working with? Now, if you're going to need new cheerleaders for cool things you do, I'm happy to be one. So I think most of you are somewhere on my LinkedIn already. But if you're not, do find me there and let's connect. I will be your cheerleader as long as I think things you do are cool. So don't share me some shady, non-quality stuff, but share something you're doing really with your heart and doing it well and with quality. And I'll be the first one to kind of cheer for that and share it further and see how I can support you and help you. With that in mind, if you also want to dive deeper into these topics, I don't do anything as a course where we go really deep in all of them. But there are 2 areas where I can help you. One is in area of skill development. So within Trainers Toolbox, all the courses are really built for trainers. The foundational TTT, the place where everything starts, highly recommended to do it if you haven't. And then also advanced skills for trainers, brain-based learning, using emotions or positive psychology. Depends which skills you point down that you need to be developing. So if you're looking into developing skills or reflecting how to develop them, don't be shy to reach out. And then on the side of network and story, that's not something I work with in forms of workshop and courses, but I do work with it in one-on-one way, in something that's a merge of mentoring, consulting, coaching, more of mentoring and consulting, really just helping you with feedback, helping you with pointing down some of the blind spots. So if you're curious about that, you can also reach out and I can tell you more about that. I don't do that a lot, usually with 1 or 2 people in parallel over a couple of months, but I am available more for alumni, usually from TTT, but I'm also available for that for other trainers and coaches. If you just need that, touch point to help you land where are you right now. Now, having that said, I don't have other ways that I can follow up with you on this, but I'm always very happy to hear any questions or, requests for feedback or for help with something. Just don't ask me again to tell my story. I think I've said it today more than long enough, and I hope that one will serve to fulfill that questions once and for all. But other than that, ask me for specific details, ask me for specific spot where you got stuck, ask me for more tools or exercises, and I'll always be very happy to share that and to kind of, cheerlead and help you work out your story. So with that in mind, I'm killing the recording here, and then I will just hear if anybody at this way over time moment has any questions or anything you want to share, and if everybody is alive.